$3,500 for electricity? This is insane, Brian. We've been cutting back on everything to save money. Something's definitely wrong, I said, waving the bill in front of Brian's face, my voice trembling with frustration. He sighed, looking up from his phone just long enough to roll his eyes. You probably left the oven on. I told you not to bake every day. I clenched my fists. No, I make sure everything's turned off. There's something bigger going on here. I glanced out the kitchen window toward the old tool shed. It had been years since anyone had used it for anything but storage. Brian stood up, lazily stretching his arms. You're overreacting, Liv. It's just a bill. Just a bill? I snapped. We're wasting money we don't have, Brian. We need to figure this out. He shrugged and walked toward the living room, where the TV was blasting some reality show I never liked. I'll look into it tomorrow. Anger boiled inside me as I glared at him. Tomorrow? This can't wait. We need to check now. Brian flopped onto the couch, flipping channels without a care. Fine. I'll look at the breaker box later tonight, okay? Later. It was always later with him. I stormed out the back door and towards the tool shed, flashlight in hand. The chilly Ohio evening did nothing to cool my temper. Once at the shed, I jiggled the rusty lock open and scanned the interior. Cobwebs hung from the rafters, untouched tools littered the workbench, and the faint hum of electricity caught my ear. I followed the sound, shining the flashlight into dark corners, until I found a run of wires leading from the exterior wall. My heart pounded as I traced the wiring back outside. I needed answers, not more questions. By the time I got back inside, Brian was asleep on the couch, typical. I grabbed my coat and headed out to the breaker box next to the house. The wiring setup looked standard at first glance, but something was off. Closer inspection revealed a secondary line trailing from it, leading underground towards the tool shed. Brian, I hollered, but he didn't stir. Typical again. Frustrated, I stomped back inside and grabbed him by the arm. Come with me, now. What's your problem, Liv? He mumbled, rubbing his eyes. I dragged him outside, pointing at the wiring. Explain this. He stared at it, silent. I don't know. Maybe it's been like that forever. No, Brian, this isn't normal. I want to know what's going on in that tool shed. We trudged back to the shed in silence, the moonlight our only guide. With the flashlight scanning every nook, I felt like a detective on a crime scene. When we reached the shed, I flicked the lights on, and Brian looked genuinely bewildered. Come on, Liv, let's go back inside. We'll call an electrician tomorrow. Brian, stop delaying. We need to figure this out. I insisted, reaching for the plug that connected the tool shed to the main house. As I yanked it out, a sudden uproar of voices spilled into the quiet night. It wasn't just the hum of electricity. It was the TV inside the tool shed. We both froze. Brian's jaw tightened, and I could see panic flickering in his eyes. You've been watching TV in here? While we can't even afford our bills? I was beyond furious. But before Brian could answer, the shed door burst open, and there stood Paula, Brian's mother, her eyes wide with surprise. She marched past us, muttering something about her favorite show. Mom, what are you doing here? Brian asked, bewilderedly. Paula glanced back in a hurry to return to her program. Just catching up on my soaps. What's it to you? As she disappeared back into the shed, Brian avoided my gaze, shuffling his feet in the dirt. Brian, this bill isn't from some oven I left on. It's from your mother hiding out in the shed and watching TV every night. This isn't just carelessness. It's deceit, I said, shaking with anger. For the first time, Brian looked genuinely cornered, and in that moment I knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, the tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. I found Brian in the kitchen, sipping his coffee and staring out the window. His silence was almost worse than the arguments. Brian, we need to talk about this, I said, my voice firm. He looked at me, his eyes tired and distant. What more is there to say, Liv? Mom's been watching TV in the shed. Big deal. I slammed my hand on the counter. It's a huge deal! We're struggling with bills because of this. You knew and didn't say anything. He sighed heavily. I didn't think it was such a problem. She's lonely since Dad passed. I shook my head in disbelief. Lonely or not, this isn't right. We need to discuss how to handle this situation. At that moment, Paula waltzed into the kitchen, her usual brisk self. Good morning, you two. Lovely weather today, isn't it? She said, completely ignoring the tension. I took a deep breath. Paula, we need to talk about the tool shed. Her eyes narrowed slightly. What's there to talk about? I looked at Brian, but he avoided my gaze. The electricity bill is through the roof because you're living in the shed, Paula. We can't afford this. She stiffened, her jaw set. Living in the shed? I'm simply enjoying some peace and quiet. Besides, I have nowhere else to go. Brian cleared his throat. Mom, we were thinking maybe you should move closer. There are a few places nearby we could look at. Paula's eyes widened. What? I can't just up and move. This is my home, too. No, Paula, it's our home. Brian and I took it over after my parents passed. You moving in without asking is affecting us, I said, trying to stay calm. Brian shifted uncomfortably. We need to find a solution, Mom, something that works for all of us. Paula crossed her arms, defiant. Do you expect me to just pack up and leave? Where do you want me to go? A long silence followed. Finally, I spoke. There's a small property down the road. It's close enough so we can help if needed, but gives everyone their space. Paula scoffed. And how am I supposed to afford that? I glanced at Brian, feeling the weight of the situation. We can help you sell your current place, use that money to buy something new nearby. Brian finally looked at his mother. It's the best solution, Mom. You'll have your own place, and Olivia and I can sort out our finances. The room fell silent again. Paula's face flushed with anger, but she didn't argue further. She turned abruptly and left the room, muttering under her breath. Brian and I stood there, the silence heavy between us. This isn't over, Brian. We need proper boundaries here, I said quietly. He nodded, looking deflated. I know, Liv. Let's take it one step at a time. I watched as he walked away, feeling a mixture of relief and dread. This was just the beginning of untangling the mess our lives had become. But for now, it was a step towards reclaiming some control. The days dragged on, and the tension in the house didn't get any better. Brian's work hours grew more erratic, and his late-night absences left me both suspicious and worried. One evening, I found myself pacing the living room, glancing at the clock. It was past midnight when I heard the sound of the bathroom door opening, a sound I'd grown used to but couldn't ignore. I walked up to the bathroom door, noticing the bathroom lights still on and toilet paper running low again. Something wasn't adding up. Curiosity getting the better of me, I stayed by the door, listening. There were strange mutterings inside, almost as if two voices were speaking. I knocked lightly. Brian? No answer came. I opened the door a crack, peeking in, but found nothing unusual. The room was empty. Confusion crept in, making me more determined to figure out what was happening under our roof. The following day, I spoke to Brian about his odd work hours. He was sliding on his jacket, ready to leave. Brian, why are you coming home so late these days? You never used to work these hours. He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. Just lots of projects at work, Liv. You know how it is. You don't even tell me when you're coming back. It's not just about work, is it? I pressed. His face hardened. You're being paranoid, Liv. I've got enough on my plate without you grilling me. Anger and hurt flashed through me. Paranoid? Do you think I haven't noticed the extra toilet paper being used? Someone is here when you're not, Brian. He turned away sharply. You're imagining things. Let's just drop it, okay? Later that night, I waited again, catching the same mysterious use of the bathroom. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I stayed up, pretending to sleep. At 2 a.m. I heard it, the distant, muffled sounds of conversation. Slowly, I crept out of bed and followed the noise towards the tool shed. Outside, a small glow of light peeked through the shed window. I approached quietly, peering in. There was Brian, not working, but lounging with his mother, Paula, both engrossed in a late-night TV show. My heart sank as the pieces started to fit together. The next morning, I confronted Paula as she was making breakfast. Paula, we need to talk about what's going on in the tool shed at night. She looked at me, feigning innocence. What do you mean, dear? You and Brian. You spend late nights in there watching TV while he's supposed to be working. Our bills are soaring because of it, I said, my voice shaking with anger. Paula's eyes flashed with defiance. So what if we watch TV together? Brian needs a break from you constantly nagging him. Taken aback, I narrowed my eyes. This isn't just about TV, Paula. It's about you two lying and sneaking around. She smirked, leaning closer. Maybe if you weren't so uptight, Olivia, Brian wouldn't need an escape. I stood my ground, feeling the fire ignite within me. This stops now. No more using the tool shed. No more secrets. We can't keep doing this. Paula's expression changed, turning cold. "We'll see about that," she said quietly, but it was enough to know this fight was far from over. The reality of Brian's betrayal and Paula's influence bore down on me. I wasn't paranoid. I was in the middle of a deceitful game, and now I was determined to take control. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with the dreaded electricity bill in front of me. My hands shook as I dialed the number for the power company. After a few minutes of back and forth, I managed to schedule an inspection for the following day. When the inspector arrived, he was a middle-aged man with a kind face. "Ma'am, I'm here to check on the high electricity usage you've reported," he said, tipping his hat. "Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. I have no idea what's causing this," I replied, showing him the way to the tool shed. The inspector took out his tools and began examining the outside wall. After a few minutes, he frowned. "There's definitely something odd here. This wiring looks like it's been tampered with." My heart pounded. "What do you mean?" He pointed to a section of the wall where wires ran towards the tool shed. "These wires aren't standard. It looks like something's drawing a lot of power from your main supply." I watched as he continued his inspection, shining a flashlight into the dimly lit interior of the shed. "There's definitely some unusual activity here," he confirmed. I felt a surge of anger and frustration. "Can you help me disconnect it?" "Of course, ma'am, I'll get this taken care of right away," he responded, rolling up his sleeves. Within an hour, the unauthorized wiring was removed, and the shed fell silent, finally disconnected from our power. I thanked the inspector, who reassured me that the situation would be rectified in our next bill cycle. That evening, Brian came home looking annoyed. "Why's the shed dark, Liv?" he asked, tossing his keys on the counter. I crossed my arms, staring him down. "Because I had the power disconnected. The inspector found suspicious wiring." His eyes flashed with anger. "You did what? You had no right." "No right? We're drowning in bills, Brian. That shed was draining our finances." I shot back. Before he could respond, Paula appeared in the doorway, her face a thundercloud. "What's this about the shed losing power? My TV's not working." I took a deep breath, preparing for the storm. "The inspector found unauthorized wiring. We can't afford this, Paula. It stops now." Paula's face turned red with fury. "You think you can control everything, don't you, Olivia? This is my son's home, too. You can't just decide these things." "It's not about control, Paula. It's about our family's well-being. If you won't respect that, I'll take steps to make sure it's enforced," I replied, my voice unwavering. Brian stepped in, raising his hands. "Everyone just calm down, all right? We'll figure this out." But Paula wasn't having it. She turned to Brian, eyes blazing. "Your wife is ruining everything, Brian. You need to put your foot down." "Mom, I've already told you we need to reduce our expenses," Brian said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You're just as much a part of this household," she hissed at me, ignoring her son's half-hearted protest. "I am, Paula, which is why this can't continue," I responded, my patience wearing thin. Paula scowled. "This isn't over, Olivia. Not by a long shot." As she stormed out of the room, I felt a mix of relief and dread. I had won this battle, but the war was far from over. And now, deep down, I knew the next steps would be the hardest. The following days were cold and silent. Brian avoided me more than usual, and Paula hardly left her room. In the evening, I decided enough was enough. I marched into the living room where Brian was mindlessly flipping channels. "Brian, we need to talk. Now," I said, standing in front of the TV. He sighed and turned off the TV. "All right, what is it?" "We can't keep living like this under a cloud of deceit and stress. We need to address the tool shed situation once and for all." "Come with me," I demanded, leading him outside. As we stepped into the chilly night, Brian followed reluctantly. I led him to the tool shed and opened the door. "Look at this, Brian. Look at what you've turned our home into." Brian stood at the entrance, his face shadowed. "I don't see the big deal, Liv. It's just a shed." "Just a shed? This just a shed has cost us thousands of dollars and driven a wedge between us," I barked, barely containing my frustration. Suddenly, I heard the sound of footsteps rushing toward us. Paula, her face twisted in anger, appeared in the doorway. "What are you two doing here?" Without waiting for Brian to answer, I turned to her. "Paula, we've had enough of this secrecy. I know you're using the shed every night. You need to explain yourself." Paula's eyes blazed. "You think you're so righteous, Olivia. You don't know the half of it." Brian stepped back, looking trapped between us. Mom, just tell her the truth. Paula sneered. Fine. I've been staying in the shed because Brian promised me I could. He knew how much I missed my own space after your father's death, Olivia. I turned to Brian, my voice ice cold. Is this true, Brian? You knew about this from the start? He hesitated before nodding. I didn't think it'd become such an issue. I felt a surge of betrayal. We've been drowning in bills while you two play house out here. This isn't just about space, Paula. It's about respect, decency, and honesty. Paula took a step closer, her voice low and menacing. Don't preach to me about honesty, Olivia. You've always tried to control everything, making Brian's life a living hell. I'm the one who keeps him sane. My anger flared. Sane? Lies and deceit are what you consider sanity? Without warning, Paula grabbed the unplugged power cord and shoved it toward me. You want honesty? How about you admit you've been driving a wedge between my son and me ever since we moved in? Brian finally spoke, his voice broken. Mom, that's enough. Olivia's right. We need to stop this. What's been happening isn't fair to anyone. Paula looked horrified, as if she couldn't believe her son was siding against her. How dare you, Brian? After everything I've sacrificed for you? Without even looking back, I turned and walked out of the shed. Their voices faded as my feet hit the gravel pathway back to the house. I stormed inside and collapsed on the couch, trembling with the weight of everything. Minutes later, Brian entered, his face pale. Liv, I'm sorry. I looked up at him, my eyes cold. Sorry isn't enough, Brian. This has gone on too long. I need you to make a choice. Either we fix this mess together, or I fix it alone. He swallowed hard, the decision heavy in the air. We'll fix it together, he finally said, but trust wouldn't be easily rebuilt. That night, while the house finally fell silent, I knew this was more than just a strained marriage. It was a battle for control, honesty, and survival, and I wasn't done fighting yet. The house was eerily quiet the next morning. Paula had retreated to her room, and Brian sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at his coffee. I knew it was time to take matters into my own hands. I started searching the house, room by room, for any equipment or clues that hinted at further deceit. It wasn't long before I found a small, hidden camera tucked behind a picture frame in the living room. My heart raced. This wasn't just about the tool shed. This was about control and surveillance. I marched into the kitchen, holding the camera. Brian, what is this? He looked up, his eyes widening with shock. Liv, I swear, I didn't know about that. I slammed the camera on the table. More lies, Brian? How much of our life has been recorded? Paula stormed in, her face flushed with anger. I did that. I needed to keep an eye on things while you were busy being judgmental and controlling. I turned to her, fury in every word. Surveillance in my own home? How dare you? Paula squared her shoulders unfazed. I did what I had to do to protect my son. I took a step closer, my voice low but sharp. Protect him or control him? You've overstepped your bounds, Paula. This is unacceptable. Brian stood up, trying to mediate. Mom, this has gone too far. Olivia's right. You can't spy on us. Paula looked at Brian, betrayal in her eyes. After everything, you're turning against me? Brian's voice wavered. Mom, stop. This isn't helping anyone. We need to stop the lies and deception. It's tearing everything apart. Paula's eyes narrowed. You think you're better off without me? Do you really believe this woman cares about you? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Brian is my husband, Paula. I care about him more than you know. But this isn't about care anymore. It's about trust, which you've destroyed. The room was thick with tension. Brian took a shaky breath. Mom, you should go. We need some space to fix things. Paula's face turned crimson. You're choosing her over me? After everything I've done for you? Brian's voice steadied. I'm choosing to save my marriage, Mom. You need to leave. Paula's eyes blazed with hatred as she looked at me. This isn't over, Olivia. You will regret this. As she stormed out of the house, Brian collapsed into a chair, his hands trembling. Liv, I'm so sorry. I never wanted it to come to this. I sat across from him, feeling a mixture of relief and sorrow. Brian, we need to rebuild our trust. I can't keep living like this, doubting everything. He nodded, looking defeated. I know. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. That night, I combed through the house, removing every bit of surveillance equipment I could find. Each hidden camera and microphone felt like another betrayal peeled away. Though the storm had cleared some of the air, the damage was deep, Brian and I sat in the living room later, the silence now heavy with the weight of the truth. "Thank you for standing up to her, Brian," I said quietly. He looked at me, eyes filled with remorse. "I should have done it sooner, Liv. I'm sorry for everything." The days ahead would be hard, filled with the struggle to rebuild what had been broken. But for now, the house was ours again, without the shadow of deceit looming over us. We had a long way to go, but the first step had been taken. Together, we would face whatever came next. A week later, Paula stood on our porch, eyes red from crying. It was strange seeing her so vulnerable. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice shaky. I hesitated but nodded. "Fine, but this has to be a constructive conversation, Paula." We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where countless arguments had erupted. Brian joined us, his face tense. Paula took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot, and I realized that I overstepped. I didn't mean to cause all this pain. I just didn't want to feel alone." Brian reached out, touching his mother's hand. "Mom, we understand that, but spying on us and sneaking around wasn't the way to handle it." Paula's eyes filled with tears. "I know. I'm sorry, Olivia. I shouldn't have tried to come between you two. Can you forgive me?" I took a moment, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Paula, it's going to take time. Trust isn't something you rebuild overnight. But if you really mean it, we can try." She nodded, wiping her tears. "I mean it. I want things to be better. I want to be part of your lives, in a healthy way." I stood up, feeling the need to take control of the situation. "All right, let's start fresh, but there are conditions. First, no more staying in the toolshed." Paula quickly nodded. "Agreed. And secondly," I continued, "if you need somewhere to stay until you sell your place and find something nearby, you can stay with us. But we need clear boundaries." Brian looked relieved. "That sounds fair, Mom. We need to set things right." Paula smiled faintly, grappling with the emotions that had built up over months. "Thank you, both of you." Days turned into weeks, and the house felt more like a home. Paula was staying in the guest room temporarily, and our communication had improved, but the scars of betrayal were still healing. One evening, as we were having dinner, Paula spoke up. "I found a small place not too far from here. It's perfect for me. I'll be moving in next week." Brian and I looked at each other, a weight lifting from our shoulders. "That's great news, Mom," Brian said, his voice filled with genuine relief. Paula nodded, looking more at peace than I had ever seen her. "I hope this helps us move forward. I want to be a positive part of your lives." Later that night, Brian and I sat on the porch, watching the stars. "Liv, thank you for giving her another chance," he said quietly. I leaned against him. "It's not just about her, Brian. It's about us, too. We need to be strong together." He hugged me tightly. "We will be. From now on, things will be different." The process of healing wasn't easy. There were still moments of distrust and lingering resentments, but we were making progress. We talked more openly, shared our worries, and sought to understand each other's perspectives. As the weeks went by, Paula's new place became a sanctuary for her, and our home slowly regained its sense of safety and love. The drama that had overshadowed us so long began to fade, replaced by a newfound respect and understanding. Paula was still part of our lives, but with boundaries that respected everyone's space and needs. The house was filled with laughter and joy again, and we finally felt like a family on the mend, ready to face whatever came our way. In the end, we realized that forgiveness and trust weren't just handouts. They were earned through consistent actions and genuine intentions. And we were all committed to making things right, slowly but surely. Paula's moving day arrived quicker than expected. I watched from the porch as the movers packed the last of her belongings into the truck. It was a strange mix of relief and trepidation. Paula walked over, looking both hopeful and nervous. "Thank you for everything, Olivia. I mean it." I nodded. "It's a fresh start for all of us, Paula. Let's make the most of it." She hugged Brian tightly and then turned to me, offering a tentative embrace. I accepted it, feeling the tentative warmth. As the truck pulled away, I turned to Brian. "We need to change the locks and secure the house properly." He sighed but nodded in agreement. "You're right. We need to make sure this never happens again." That weekend, I called a locksmith and replaced all the locks, then moved Brian's belongings into a rental storage unit. He stood by, watching as I packed his things. "Liv, do we really need to do this?" he asked. pain in his eyes. I paused, looking at him. Brian, we need to separate for a while. We've both been through so much, we need time to heal. He swallowed hard, finally nodding. I understand. Whatever it takes to make things right. The next day, I handed him the keys to the storage unit. You can stay there until you find a place. We'll talk about the rest later. Brian moved his things without protest, leaving the house feeling both empty and free. The separation was hard, but necessary. I needed space to think, to breathe, to figure out what came next. I changed the house's interior, making it my own again. Fresh paint, new furniture arrangements, and the removal of all surveillance equipment helped reclaim my space. It felt like an act of defiance and liberation. A week later, I filed for divorce, demanding alimony. When I handed Brian the papers, he looked broken, yet resigned. I didn't want it to come to this, Liv, he whispered. Neither did I replied, my voice steady, but we need to move forward separately. The court proceedings went smoothly, and soon enough Brian was legally out of my life. It was bittersweet, but I knew it was for the best. Meanwhile, Paula began renovating the Toolshed into a livable space. She worked tirelessly, and I saw her determination to make things right. One afternoon, she invited me over to see her progress. As we walked through the Toolshed, which now looked more like a cozy studio, Paula spoke softly. This is my new beginning, Olivia. I want to thank you for giving me this chance. I looked around, impressed by her efforts. It's looking great, Paula. I'm glad you found your own space. She smiled, a genuine warmth in her eyes. And thank you for letting us start fresh, too. At home, the quiet evenings were a stark contrast to the chaos that once engulfed our lives. Paula and I gradually built a newfound bond, grounded in mutual respect and understanding. One day, as we sat on the porch enjoying the sunset, she turned to me. You know, Olivia, watching our favorite shows together has become my favorite part of the day. I chuckled, surprised by how much had changed. Mine too. Who would have thought? We laughed, the tension of the past finally easing away. Despite all the turmoil, we had come out stronger. I found peace in the everyday routines, enjoying the small moments that felt truly mine. The journey from betrayal to liberation had been hard and painful, but in the end, it forged a new chapter filled with promise. Paula and I survived the storm and discovered that sometimes even the most unlikely alliances could lead to genuine harmony. Together, we had built something that neither of us could have foreseen, a challenging yet uniquely rewarding peace. And with that, I knew I was ready to face whatever came next.